In the years after the September morning that changed the world, a series of forces quietly reshaped the way America fought its wars. Not all of those forces wore military uniforms. Not all answered to any chain of command voters could see. And among them, no company stirred more controversy, fear, and fascination than a private army that called itself Blackwater. It began far from the war zones where its name would later echo. In the mid-1990s, Erik Prince, a former Navy SEAL from a wealthy Michigan family, looked out at what he saw as a gap in the market. The United States military had downsized after the Cold War, shrinking its forces and closing bases. Yet the world wasn't getting safer. Prince imagined a training ground where elite units could practice without limits, with cutting-edge ranges and no bureaucratic delays. He bought thousands of acres of swamp and forest in North Carolina and built a sprawling complex he named Blackwater Lodge and Training Center. The name came from the dark-stained water that pulled through the wooded wetlands. At first, it was simply a place to train, a business idea, a self-styled sanctuary for precision and discipline. But history has a way of bending business plans. After 9/11s, Washington's appetite for contractors exploded. The military needed people fast. The State Department needed security. Intelligence agencies needed logistical support in places where their own presence was thin. Blackwater, with its polished ranges, well-trained staff, and owner connected to political networks, stepped forward. It didn't take long for the company to evolve from a training facility into something far more controversial, a private military firm sending armed contractors into active war zones. To the public, the concept already sounded unsettling, like the plot of a movie set in a future where governments outsource violence. But to agencies struggling with limited manpower and a rapidly expanding conflict, it was a convenient solution. Blackwater promised reliability. It promised readiness. It promised to do the jobs that needed doing, without the slow gears of government slowing them down. By the early years of the Iraq War, Blackwater contractors were everywhere. They guarded American diplomats, escorted convoys through streets thick with hostility, and secured sites scattered across the country. They were heavily armed, dressed in tactical gear, and operated under rules different from the soldiers beside them. In a war already complicated, their presence added another blurred line. The company argued it was essential. Iraq, after all, was a place where every road could hide an explosive, every crowd could mask a threat. Ambushes happened without warning, and kidnappings were a daily risk. Blackwater offered a level of protection the State Department insisted it could not function without. For the diplomats traveling outside the green zone, their fate often lay in the hands of these contractors. The vehicles were up-armored, the tactics aggressive, the movements deliberate. When a motorcade rolled through Baghdad, civilians learned to get out of the way. But the same actions that kept clients alive also hardened resentment among Iraqis. Many felt the company operated like a parallel force, untouchable and unpredictable. Complaints piled up, each one adding to a growing unease about who was actually accountable in this new world of privatized warfare. Troops in uniform were bound by military law. Contractors existed in a murky space technically under U.S. authority, but not governed by the same code of justice. For critics, it felt like security without oversight. One of the earliest and most dramatic incidents came in 2004 in the city of Fallujah. For Blackwater, contractors were escorting supplies when they drove into an area that had grown increasingly hostile. Their vehicles weren't well armored, and the risk was high. They were ambushed, killed, and their bodies were mutilated and hung from a bridge over the Euphrates. The images shocked the world. For many Americans, it was the first time they heard the name Blackwater. For Iraq, it became the spark that ignited the First Battle of Fallujah, a ferocious military assault that left deep scars on the city and the conflict. As Blackwater expanded, it took on more complex missions. Its ranks included former soldiers, Marines, SEALs, and Special Operations veterans from around the world. To its supporters, it represented professionalism, highly trained, capable, ready to operate in places too volatile for diplomatic staff and too sensitive for large military units. To its critics, it blurred the lines between national duty and corporate profit. They warned that giving a private company roles traditionally filled by soldiers risked creating a force driven as much by contract value as by strategy. Then came the incident that pushed Blackwater into the center of an international outcry. In September 2007, in a crowded Baghdad traffic circle known as Nisour Square, a convoy of Blackwater contractors escorting U.S. diplomats opened fire. The contractors said they were responding to threats of potential car bomb. Gunfire they believed was aimed at them. But when the shooting stopped, 17 Iraqi civilians lay dead. Among them were people who had simply been driving to work, walking across the square, or waiting for the light to change. The chaos, the smoke, the sudden burst of gunfire, it all unfolded in the heart of the capital in broad daylight. The news spread instantly. Iraqi witnesses insisted there had been no provocation. The government condemned the killings. American officials struggled to respond. And around the world, the incident reignited questions about private military firms operating with what seemed like immunity. The FBI investigated. Eventually, several Blackwater personnel were charged. Years later, some were convicted, only to be pardoned near the end of a U.S. presidential term, reopening old wounds, and reminding many Iraqis of a justice system they felt had never included them. Inside Blackwater, the narrative was different. Supporters argued that the men were thrust into split-second decisions during chaotic and dangerous conditions. They said the rules of engagement were unclear, the threat environment unforgiving, and mistakes inevitable in a war zone. But even some in the U.S. government acknowledged that the company's aggressive posture had contributed to escalating tensions, making cooperation with local communities harder and trust harder still. The Nisour Square shooting didn't just stain Blackwater's reputation. It exposed the deeper questions about what happens when warfare is outsourced. Who takes responsibility when something goes wrong? When armed contractors act in America's name, does the public even know what is being done on its behalf? And how much of a modern war is fought by people the country never sees? The company tried to rebuild its image. It changed its name to These Services, then later to Academy. Leadership shifted. Policies were rewritten. Public relations campaigns tried to distance the new brand from the controversies of the past. But for many, the original name stuck, embedded in the collective memory of a war defined as much by confusion and trauma as by strategy. Beyond Iraq, Blackwater's footprint spread further than most people realized. It provided security in Afghanistan, trained foreign police forces, supported CIA missions, and offered tactical instruction to militaries around the globe. Some of its work was routine, some was classified, some was whispered about in Washington corridors, where lawmakers tried to understand how much influence a single private company had gained. In a world where corporations already shaped economics, technology, and culture, Blackwater added something new: the idea that war itself could be a commercial service. Many of the people who worked for the company were veterans who struggled after returning from deployments. They knew the rhythms of conflict and found contracting work a way to use skills they trusted. Some described Blackwater as a lifeline, a place that offered financial stability, camaraderie, and purpose in a civilian world that often felt distant and confusing. Others admitted the job hardened them, pulling them back into danger for paychecks that grew with each contract. And like soldiers in any war, contractors wrestled with what they saw, what they did, and what they carried home. For Iraqis, the company's presence left a different legacy. Some remembered Blackwater convoys as a force that shoved their cars aside, firing warning shots near their tires, shouting commands they didn't understand. Some remembered them as guards who kept diplomats alive in a country collapsing around them. But for many, the name Blackwater came to symbolize a broader imbalance in the occupation, a foreign force that seemed to operate above the law, shielded from consequences in a place where ordinary people faced them every day. Governments took note. Hearings were held. Reports were written. Critics argued that the rise of contractors had grown far faster than the systems designed to oversee them. They questioned the ethics of allowing a private business to hold so much power in a war zone. Supporters argued that without contractors, diplomatic missions would have shut down, reconstruction would have slowed, and military units would have been stretched to the breaking point. Both were right in their own way, and that tension never fully resolved. Over time, the U.S. government tightened its regulations. Contracts were rewritten more carefully. Oversight expanded. But the fundamental question remained: once a country grows dependent on private forces, can it ever truly disentangle itself? Blackwater's story is also the story of a global shift. As nations face complex conflicts, many turn to private firms for help. Some provide cybersecurity, some guard shipping lanes, some offer training, logistics, intelligence, and some, like Blackwater, step directly into the line of fire. The model didn't end when the company changed its name. It spread, evolving into new forms and new players. Warfare became not only a matter of national armies, but of markets and contracts, profits and liabilities. Looking back, Blackwater sits at a crossroads of that history. It emerged when fear and urgency opened doors. It acted in a world where lines of accountability were still being drawn. It succeeded in ways that earned admiration and failed in ways that left deep wounds. And it forced people everywhere to confront a difficult truth: that modern conflict isn't just fought by soldiers, governments, or nations. It's shaped by businesses that operate out of sight, stepping into roles once reserved for the state. In the end, the story of Blackwater isn't only about one company. It's about what happens when a society under pressure changes the rules of its own defense, when convenience outruns caution, and when the tools of war become something you can purchase off a contract sheet. It's a story with consequences that outlasted the battles where its name was shouted, feared, defended, and condemned. And as the dust of those years settles, one question remains suspended over every future conflict: when the lines between public duty and private power blur, who carries the weight when the guns fall silent? Only history can decide.